Hey y'all, thanks so much for checking out part 2 of my only non-Earth OCU series. As always, it's incredibly appreciated, and I just want to say thanks first off for the good response that part 1 had. It was a really awesome blast to write and record, so seeing people actually appreciate the work that went into it was really cool. With all that gooey mess out of the way, I'm your captain, and it's a pleasure to take you on a tour of another corner of the multiverse. Cheers, everybody. Ed flinched. That fight with the boulder wasn't just quick, it was quick to the point of pain. The girl he had been talking to mere moments ago decimated every rock that man flung at her, and within 3 motions she created a rock capable of not only kicking the man around within an inch of his life, but she launched him at what had to be over 60 miles an hour out of the ring, shattering the wall around the ring and kicking up dust all over the area as cheers rang out among the crowd, loud enough to make the boy cover his ears. The announcer's voice rang out into the ether. The winner, by way of knockout, the Blind Bandit. Who will dare challenge her? As the voice rang out, someone beside the announcer moved out over to the crowds, waving a belt in their directions, getting them riled up even more. The girl stopped everything with a wave of her arm, pointing out into the crowd. That guy, the Blind Bandit said, pointing dead at Ed. She grinned. I'm fighting him next. Oh, is that so? The announcer asked. What, you want your payday, don't you? The Blind Bandit asked, Ed sighing as he got to his feet, slowly walking down as the crowd screamed in his ear. Mostly boos, probably because the girl revealed that he only gave a damn about the cash instead of the title. He stood across from her, grinning in response, a grin that took up half the girl's face. Welcome, challenger. What's the name you want to cheer out to the crowd? The announcer asked. I don't care, Ed responded. The announcer stiffened. We need a name, young man. The crowd needs to know who to root against, am I right, people? The announcer shouted to the crowds, who screamed their approval. Ed grunted. His face was already out there. The last thing he needed was people knowing his name. Full Metal, Ed said flatly. Being called that name was probably the only bit of familiarity he was going to get around this place anyway. The announcer lifted his eyebrow. It wasn't like he could see Ed's automail, so he supposed his confusion was understandable. You want a name? That's the best you're going to get, Ed replied. The announcer shrugged. All right, folks, are you ready for the showdown of the century? The undefeated Blind Bandit versus the newcomer, Full Metal. He shouted out as he walked out of the arena. The girl in front of him crossed her arms. Under the crowd's murmuring, the girl spoke. So, Full Metal, huh? Is that for any particular reason? Is Blind Bandit for any particular reason? Ed asked back. Aha. All right, eye for an eye. She lifted her hair over her eyes, just enough for him to see that they weren't reflecting back at him. Damn, you just got more impressive, Ed said, a tone of mild surprise on his face, something that made the girl in front of him crack up smiling. Not freaked out? Concerned for my safety? The Blind Bandit asked. Are you kidding me? With what you just did, I'm more concerned about my own safety, Ed responded. That's what I like to hear. The Blind Bandit got into a fighting stance. I look forward to talking to you more, after I absolutely thrash you, Full Metal, she said, shifting her feet as Rock began moving towards Ed. Ed clapped his hands, pushing them against the wall, making a hole just big enough for him to jump through. The girl shifted back in shock. Something about the way that the rock bent to Ed's will just didn't feel right to her. But she pulled herself together as quick as possible, just not quick enough to prevent Ed from getting another move off. He clapped his hands once more, sending waves through the rock beneath it, sending the girl off balance continuously. She stomped hard, sending a wave of rock forwards to knock herself back into the ring. You're not a normal earthbender, she gasped between breaths. Ed clicked his tongue. If he could make a weapon of some kind, he could probably finish the fight quicker. Or he could use his alchemy to its full potential. Fists, a cage, a barrage of arrows, something. But he had to stay within the bounds of what a so-called earthbender could do, which meant he was out of luck when it came to hand-to-hand. That would probably be frowned upon, if not outright get him disqualified. Maybe not. That a problem? Ed asked, staring ahead at her. The girl paused, silence passing between them. I want an update on our wager, she replied. If I win, I want your name, your real one, in addition to whatever the heck you were just doing. Ed cracked his neck. You're saying that like you're gonna win. I'll give you this, we're pretty evenly matched, at least with the way we're fighting, which I don't think is normal for you, the girl said aloud. So, how about this? One less attack from both of us. We both go all out, and whoever's left standing at the end of this throwdown wins. All out, huh? Ed muttered. That wasn't going to happen. It would be way too hard to explain that away. But he could try one last trick while still fighting like an earthbender, pushing the limits of what these people could reasonably be capable of. Alright, I'm game. The girl groaned. You're lying, she replied, Ed flinching in response. Fine, you want to go into this with one hand tied behind your back? Your funeral. She shifted the rock beneath her feet, the entire arena below Ed rumbling, crackling, and splintering. She was going to try and flip the whole damn thing. Ed charged towards her, pushing his fist into the ground as he forced the arena itself to crack open and push its two halves to the side, the ground completely falling down from the girl's feet as she began careening downwards. Ed tackled her out of the way as the rest of the floor flipped from the beginning of Toph's moves, raining down on the spot where they once were with the force of several thousand pounds. If it wasn't for him, it probably would have buried them. Spinning through the air, Ed took the brunt of the landing, his back colliding with the ground in a feeling that wasn't uncommon for him lately, with all the times he'd been knocked on his ass. Are you insane? Ed shouted. You... And the winner, by way of ring out, the Blind Bandit, the announcer's voice blared. What the heck are you? Oh. Ed's eye twitched as he realized the position he was in. Out of the two of them, he was the only one touching the ground. I hate this place so much, he groaned. The girl sat herself up, offering a hand to the boy below, lifting him to his feet. Relax, I'll give you the prize money. Wait, what? I'm here for two things, the fights and the title. I don't need the money, she responded. I do got a couple of conditions, though. Full metal. Conditions, huh? Ed scratched the back of his neck. I take it this has something to do with our deal? You bet it. First, your name. You're really not gonna let that go, huh? Ed asked. Not a chance, she responded. Fine, it's Ed. Edward Elric, Ed said. Huh, it's even weirder than I thought it would be. He laughed, elbowing him. Toph Beifong, she said the name quietly, like she didn't want people in the arena to know her real name, as much as he didn't want them to know his. Now, requirement number 2. You're gonna meet me tomorrow, right above this place. Then you're gonna tell me where you're in such a hurry to be, and just what the hell you did in that ring. And if I don't get the money. Got it in one, Full Metal, Toph replied, walking away. You're way too interesting to let slide that easily. I'm telling you, just wait till you see it. The Air Temple is one of the most beautiful places in the world. Aang smiled as he took Appa's reins once more. Korra felt herself biting her tongue, as Katara echoed her inward sentiment outward. Aang, I know you're excited, but it's been 100 years, Katara explained. She was being way too nice about it. There was no way that place was still there. 100 years. Aang had been locked away for 100 years after the Fire Nation burned every last airbender to ash. While she could buy that Aang's powers had somehow locked him away from it, she had known the Fire Nation too well to think that they would have missed an entire city. They were far too thorough for that. I know, that's why I'm excited, Aang expressed. I have to see it for myself, see how much it changed, and now I have people to share it with. I can share it with my fellow Avatar. He smiled at Korra, expecting the same level of excitement in her eyes that was in his. All he got, though, was a polite smile. Unfortunately for him, even if they were both avatars, they weren't the same person. If anything, Korra was way more scared than she was excited. She had just been told what they did to the Southern Water Tribe, because the Avatar, both of whom had been missing in action for a century, might have been there. Aang's birth there was a guarantee after Roku died. They would have been far more extreme with the air nomads than they would have been with the Water Tribe. She almost didn't notice that Aang had been trying and failing to wake Sokka. Sighing, she pushed him to the side. It's okay, kid. I got this. She smirked as she lit a small flame next to him. She honestly barely knew how to firebend. It was sloppy most of the time and uncontrollable the rest, but a small flame, that she could do. As the smell of smoke reached Sokka's nose, Katara got a wicked grin on her face. Fire! The campsite's burning! Almost immediately, Sokka jumped up in his sleeping bag, tripping over himself and falling chin first into the rocky pavement. He looked up at Korra as he groaned, only for Korra to stare at his shirt as it popped out of the bag. His Water Tribe shirt. She left the Water Tribe years ago. She had thought maybe she had moved on from missing them at this point, but more and more she found herself lingering. Sokka's club, his boomerang, Katara's necklace. It made her think of that place, her life there, her parents. She shook off the thought. She didn't have time to think through all of that. She had just met the other Avatar, and she was about to see an air temple. Her life was way more interesting now. Besides, she was too important to keep cooped up in those walls forever, right? Come on, sleepyhead, let's get moving, she said to Sokka's tired, grumbling face as she pulled him out of his bag. I don't want to stay here too long, Zuko muttered to himself as she stepped off the ship, walking shoulder to shoulder with his uncle. Because of the avatars? Iroh asked. Don't mention them here, Zuko replied curtly. If anyone gets wind of the fact that they're out here, they'll start hunting them too. And they might hurt them, Zuko replied, looking down at the ground. Showing concerns for the avatars, Prince Zuko? Iroh asked probingly. His grandson hadn't been as explosive as he was known to be since the loss of the avatars. Rather, he just seemed to be thinking. He had spent an especially long time in the cell that he had sat with Korra when he thought he was interrogating her. More times than not, it evolved into a conversation, ones that made him think. The time before last, Zuko had left the room especially quiet. He always wondered just what it was that Korra had said to him. If either of the avatars is killed, I will lose everything. I can't afford for people to find out. Zuko spat, forcing his face back into one of anger, only to be confronted by someone he'd rather not see. Someone who made his anger genuine. Zhao. This whole place is disgusting, Azula sneered as her and Mai walked past the gathered crowds towards the hole in the wall-style restaurant before them. Is it now? Mai sighed. She had expected Azula to feel this way. She had expected even more to come in the next few minutes. She wasn't wrong. This little Earth Kingdom city was nothing compared to the Fire Nation. Even the few signs of aristocracy they'd seen weren't especially impressive. Stuck in the middle of nowhere with people who look like they haven't bathed in a month and their clothes stinking up my skin, she said, lifting the clothing that adorned her, which she hadn't gotten the chance to change in over a week. And no sign of either of the avatars. What did you expect, Azula? Mai asked tiredly. Of course there wasn't going to be a sign of people who didn't even exist anymore. Something, Azula huffed. Maybe not the avatars, but something remotely interesting. And if there was something here, I was hoping to beat Zuzu to it. She scratched her head. Maya looked at her. Her brother was banished. Only the spirits knew where, and he was probably half dead, or completely dead. And she was still determined to outdo him. Let's just go home, Azula, I'm telling you. Maya stopped as Azula held a hand to her lips. Her ears perked up as a conversation hit both of their ears. I'm telling you, all of them were just blown away. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. A woman in the small restaurant Azula was now rapidly approaching had said, Our officers are among the best in the world. There's no way some kid could match them, an elderly man responded. As he did, even Maya had begun paying closer attention. The soldiers of the Earth Kingdom were, as much as most Fire Nation soldiers hated to admit, highly trained. They made occupying the Earth Kingdom a continuous, painful slog for the Fire Nation, so someone, especially a kid, crushing them. Maybe Azula had a point. But he didn't just crush them. I saw it with my own eyes. Their rocks just turned to dust, just poof. The old woman held her hands up. And if that's not crazy enough, he turned the water in the fountain behind them into ice and just carried the soldiers into the sky as he got away. Control over 2 elements. The man rolled his eyes as he got up to leave, with the elderly woman sighing at yet another person who refused to believe her tale. That was until Azula sat down. Can I help you, miss? The woman asked, clearly on edge, but not really knowing why herself. Li Mei. My name's Li Mei, Azula said, gesturing to herself. Seeing the scared look on the woman's face, she focused on putting on her most personable face. There were very few people who could see under her veil when she started lying. And this is my friend, Ling. We're just here because we heard you had the best stew in town, she said, nudging Mai. Sure, Mai replied, sitting down. As she did, the woman visibly relaxed, as she handed menus to the pair of them. Thank you, you're very kind, Azula said, putting on her best nice voice as she flashed a smile that almost immediately unsettled Mai. Azula never smiled unless there was something to smile about, and the reasons she had for that were never good. The hint of malice in her eye didn't go away, even with the innocent voice that she put on. Say, that kid you mentioned, that sounded quite interesting, Azula said, leaning in even more. Oh, I'm sure you don't want to hear about that. No matter how many people seem to see it, nobody wants to hear a thing. Especially not a young one like you. She smiled as she moved to go away. Azula lunged her hand on the top of the woman's, almost immediately forcing her tight grip into a gentle caress. No, I'd love to hear your story. Please, Azula replied, trying to make her tone sound less confrontational and more like she was just asking a favor. Something that was especially difficult considering that she wasn't used to asking for anything in life. "You look like someone with a great eye for exciting things," Azula continued. "Oh, well, if you insist," the woman smiled. In that moment, Mai was reminded of just how terrifying Azula's powers of persuasion were. "It was a young blonde boy with a bright red coat, very short. He just seemed to clap his hands as he bended. No fancy moves or anything." "Interesting," Azula pondered. "And where exactly was it that you saw this boy?" "Prince Zuko, the Avatars are the only ones left who can stop the Fire Lord from winning this war." Zhao continued his interrogation. "If you have even an ounce of loyalty left..." Zuko shot up, staring daggers at Zhao. "Like you know a thing about loyalty," he sneered. Zhao just wanted the Avatars to get them before he could. He'd find them and probably bring the full force of the Fire Nation on top of them before they could think. Who knew how many people he'd burn to do it? He'd kill them, just like his father would have, like a damn savage. Suddenly, Korra's voice rung in his ears. "Your dad burned you because you cared about your people? Sounds less like a king and more like a savage." Zuko stopped himself, forced his thoughts to be still. He hadn't meant that. It had just been a long day. A very long day. He just had his loyalty questioned after all. It made sense for him to be on edge. Loyalty? You do realize that's a two-way street. Look at your face. Was your father ever loyal to you? Zuko's eye twitched. Why now? Why were those conversations coming back to him now? "You want to say that again?" Zhao said, narrowing his eyes at the young boy who just seemed to almost look past him. "It doesn't matter," Zuko replied. "After all, the Avatar died over a century ago. If there is an Avatar left, they're alone. Nothing useful, nothing to find." Zuko said blankly as he looked towards his uncle. "Come on, Uncle. I think it's time to go." As Zuko walked, 2 soldiers blocked his path with their weaponry as a third walked in. Almost immediately, Zuko's blood ran cold. This was a trap. His own people had set a trap for him. His own... Listen to yourself. A nation built on fear and superiority isn't going to be loyal to anything. You end up with a group of people who would do anything to get ahead, even if it means stabbing me in the back. Zuko grunted out as the man in front of him continued talking. "We talked to the crew like you asked, Prince Zuko. They confirmed what we thought. Prince Zuko had both Avatars in his custody, and they escaped the second they were together," he explained. Zuko felt the fire bubbling up inside of him. He could fight his way out of this. Nobody in here was even close to as powerful as he was, as skilled as he was. All he'd have to do was attack a Fire Nation general, a man who should technically outrank him, a man who was holding him hostage. He had that right. He did, didn't he? Zuko forced his fist to his side as Zhao walked up beside him. He wouldn't fight, not yet, but Zhao would pay. He was sure of that. Korra wobbled as she stood atop the airball arena. She hated herself for agreeing to this. They shouldn't even be here, but... Now there's just weeds and dust, Aang had said, his shoulders slumped. I can't believe how much has changed. Hey, about that airball thing from earlier, I'd love to play. The words blurted out of her mouth before she could even think. It would be nice to have something to do once I learn airbending, right? Her and her big mouth. She barely even had time to react as the ball hurtled towards her, blasting her through the goal. She only managed to slow her descent by having the snow below catch her, and even that didn't fully catch her. She was hanging upside down by a tree branch. Doing good down there? Sokka asked. Oh, bite me, Korra responded as she freed her ankle from the branch, falling onto the ground, directly onto something. Something hard. Guys, you might want to come over here, she said to Katara and Sokka, as Aang was still celebrating his victory. As the shadows of her 2 new companions loomed over her, they walked directly into the line of the sun. Korra brushed her hand on the ground, revealing a skull. Something that, from the fact that it wasn't the least bit disgusting, no flesh at all stuck onto the thing, had been here for decades, probably longer. Wearing a Fire Nation helmet. We need to get Aang out of here, Korra said, her urgency clearly striking Sokka as he glanced back at the young boy behind them, a boy who was about to get a crash course in what the world had become. Ed showed up the next day like he had been asked to, or rather demanded of. It only took a few minutes for the girl to show up, punching him in the arm as a means of greeting. Well, gee, aren't you fun? Ed replied. Always. She pushed the reward money to his chest. Already? Ed asked. You aren't the kind of guy to run out on a deal. I can tell. The blind bandit responded. You also don't seem like the kind of guy to not have a plan. So, where are you headed? She asked, calmly leaning against the wall beside her. Away from here? Ed replied. Ha ha. Where? She asked back. Ed's silence filled the gap in her mind. Monkey feathers, you don't know, do you? Holy crap, are you just wandering aimlessly? I have a destination, eventually. Ed cut her off. It wouldn't mean anything to you, though. Humor me. A mistress, Ed replied flatly. You're right, Toph responded. I have absolutely no idea where that is. Maybe it's an avatar thing? Oh, not this again, Ed sighed, rubbing his eyes. You were holding back a lot, like controlling Earth limited your options, meaning that you had more. It's not the only possible anything, Ed replied, cutting her off. So what, you had some fancy bending? I'm not a bender, Ed groaned out before stiffening, realizing that he had just said something very, very wrong. Are you gonna explain that? Toph asked, Ed saying nothing in response, instead fastening the money pouch to his belt, getting ready to leave. Does it have anything to do with your arm and leg? Toph continued. Ed stepped back. He hit his automail during the fight. Nobody should have been able to see it, but then again the girl in front of him couldn't see, which meant she had to have some other way of tracking him during their fight. It must have had something to do with that bending thing. Maybe. He hated how much he didn't know about the stuff. I might be able to help you around, but not if I don't know a thing about you, Toph replied. Aren't you generous? Ed groaned. When I flipped that place, you saved me. Your top priority wasn't winning, it was me. So you seem like a good guy. Good enough, anyway, Toph replied. Besides, I told you my secret, she pointed at her eyes. Wasn't much of a secret, blind bandit. Says full metal, Toph replied. Damn, fair enough, Ed replied, looking around to make sure that nobody was near him as he pulled up his sleeve, revealing what his arm was actually made of. Toph grabbed it with both of her palms, looking more and more confused as she felt it. This isn't armor, she replied quietly. It's called automail, Ed replied. A limb replacement. Toph looked almost lost at Ed's words. Limb replacement? Does that mean... Yeah, I lost him. Do you miss them? She asked. Ed didn't have to wonder what she was talking about. It's clearly his limbs. Kind of, but I managed just fine without them, Ed replied. There's someone else who has it much worse than me in that regard. Ed put his sleeve back down. And no, my limbs aren't the reason I can do what I do. That's because I'm an alchemist, and that would take way too long to explain. Toph paused, taking in all the new information that Ed had just dropped on her. So, you're in a big rush to get to this Amestris place? Toph asked. Yeah, definitely, Ed replied. And you're just going to wander the world blankly, hoping you run into it? Toph replied. I don't have much better of an idea, Ed replied back. Come on, Toph waved Ed alongside her. What? If I let you go off out there without any supplies or any idea where you're wandering, best case scenario, you never find a city again. Worst case scenario, you end up dead of starvation or something, so just come on. I'll get you some stuff and then you can be on your way, she replied. Ed knew he wasn't exactly in the position to turn down help, especially considering he had no idea where he was. Fine. Where are we heading? Toph paused, her tone when she finally spoke showing that she wasn't exactly thrilled with the idea. We're going to my house. Hey everybody, it was a pleasure to step back into my only non-Earth OCU series for a little bit. The next video will be stepping back into Earth OCU, so look forward to that. Next time on this series though, we'll be stepping a bit more back to Aang and Korra since they kinda took the back seat this time. But Ed took the seat. Hey everybody, it was a pleasure to step back into my only non-Earth OCU series for a little bit. The next video will be stepping back into Earth OCU, so look forward to that. Next time on this series, we'll be stepping back in to learn a bit more about Aang and Korra, since they kind of took the back seat this time, but Ed took the back seat last time around, so all is fair. I appreciate you guys showing up for a look into not the strongest Earth in the multiverse, but an interesting one. And if you want to see more videos of mine in the future, please consider subscribing. I really appreciate you guys, and I look forward to seeing you all next time. Cheers!